I spent 17 years saving every penny for my grandson's future, tucking away birthday money, Christmas cash, and my Social Security surplus into a fund he never knew existed. Last week, at his high school graduation party, in front of 200 guests, he announced to his friends that hugging me was like embracing a closet full of old clothes because I smelled like mothballs. The laughter that followed changed everything. See, what nobody in that room knew, including my grandson, was that the account I'd been nurturing had just crossed $120,000. Money I'd scraped together working double shifts at the hospital until I was 70. Money I'd saved by mending my own clothes instead of buying new ones. Money I'd accumulated by choosing generic brands and clipping coupons for nearly 2 decades. That same night, I made a phone call that would teach him the most expensive lesson of his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Chen, though everyone calls me Maggie. And at 73 years old, I thought I'd seen enough of life to know that family disappointments were just part of the package. You learn to smile through forgotten birthdays, nod through backhanded compliments, and keep loving even when that love feels one-sided. But there are moments that crack something fundamental inside you. Moments when you realize that kindness, without boundaries, is just another word for being a doormat. I raised my grandson Jake from the time he was 6 months old. Not by choice initially, but because my daughter Linda had gotten mixed up with the wrong crowd after her husband died in Afghanistan. She showed up at my door one rainy Tuesday, handed me Jake, and said she needed to get her life together. That was 17 years ago. She did get clean eventually, married a real estate developer named Robert, and built herself a nice life in Westchester. But by then, Jake had become mine in every way that mattered, except legally. The arrangement worked for everyone. Linda and Robert had 2 more children, perfect blonde twins who played violin and spoke French. They lived in a house with white columns and a circular driveway, the kind of place where the grass was cut in perfect diagonal lines. Jake stayed with me in my 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, where the radiator clanged in winter and the air conditioner wheezed in summer. But it was home, and I made sure he never felt less than any other child. From the moment Jake became mine, I started planning for his future. I'd been a surgical nurse for 35 years before retiring, and I went back to work part-time doing private care because I knew what was coming. College tuition, room and board, textbooks that cost more than my first car. I opened a savings account the week after he moved in, separate from everything else, labeled simply Jake's Future in my financial files. Every month, without fail, I deposited something. When I worked overtime during flu season, the extra went into the account. When I got a cost of living adjustment on my Social Security, I calculated how much I could spare and transferred it quietly. I wore the same winter coat for 12 years, resoled my shoes instead of buying new ones, and learned to love matinee movies because they were half price. Every dollar saved was a dollar toward Jake's dreams. Linda knew I was helping with Jake's expenses, but she never asked for details. She'd send $500 a month for his care, always with a little note about how grateful she was. Robert would add another $1,000, usually with some comment about teaching Jake the value of hard work. They paid for his cell phone, bought him a car when he turned 16, and covered his SAT prep courses, but they never asked about college savings. I think they assumed their contributions were enough, that their success meant Jake would naturally be taken care of. I never corrected them. Pride, maybe. Or perhaps I wanted this to be my gift, something that was purely from me to the boy who called me grandma before he could even walk properly. Jake was a good kid mostly. He made honor roll more often than not, played basketball adequately enough to make varsity, and volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends until he discovered girls and suddenly became too busy. He had his mother's sharp features and his late father's height, a combination that made him popular without trying. But somewhere around his junior year, something shifted. It started small. He'd come home later and later, always with reasonable excuses. Basketball practice ran long. Study group at Tyler's house. Volunteer hours for National Honor Society. I believed him because I wanted to believe him. Then came the comments. Grandma, why don't you get a new couch? This one's from like the Stone Age. Grandma, everyone's parents drive BMWs to school pickup. Grandma, don't you think it's time to update your wardrobe? I laughed them off at first. Teenagers, right? They're all about appearances. But the comments became more frequent, more pointed. He started spending weekends at Linda's house, coming back with shopping bags from stores I'd never heard of, wearing sneakers that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He'd show me his new things with a strange mix of pride and pity, like he was displaying treasures to someone who could never understand their value. The smell comments started 6 months before graduation. We were in the kitchen making his favorite, pot roast, a Sunday tradition we'd maintained since he was little, when he wrinkled his nose and stepped back. Grandma, what's that smell? I sniffed, confused, thinking maybe I'd burned something. He shook his head. No, it's like mothballs or something. Coming from your sweater. My sweater was clean, freshly washed that morning, but I apologized. Anyway, changed into something else, and tried to forget the way his face had scrunched up like he'd encountered something distasteful. The next week, he mentioned it again. This time it was my coat, then my scarf. Always mothballs. Always said with that particular combination of embarrassment and disdain that teenagers perfect when they think you're not quite measuring up. I started second-guessing myself. Maybe there was a smell I couldn't detect anymore. I bought new detergent, those fancy scent beads that promised fields of lavender, dryer sheets that cost 4 times my usual brand. I hung cedar blocks in my closet, sprayed everything with fabric refresher that made me sneeze, but claimed to eliminate odors for weeks. Nothing changed. The comments continued, became jokes he'd share with his friends when he thought I wasn't listening. My grandma's house always smells like an antique store. You know, that old people smell. Linda dismissed it when I mentioned it during one of our monthly lunches. She was sitting across from me at the diner we'd been meeting at for years, picking at a Caesar salad while checking her phone every few minutes. Mom, he's 17. Everything embarrasses them at that age. Remember when I wouldn't let you drop me off at school because your car had that dent in it? She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that suggested she found the whole thing trivial, beneath consideration. I wanted to tell her it was different. That dent was from a shopping cart, an accident that said nothing about who we were. But the smell Jake kept mentioning, that imaginary mothball scent that followed me apparently like a cloud, that was about age, about being old, about being less than the polished people in Linda's world. Robert was even less helpful. During a rare family dinner at their house, where the twins performed a violin duet and the housekeeper served courses on actual china, he'd pulled me aside in his study. The walls were lined with books I was certain he'd never read, all leather-bound and color-coordinated. Maggie, you've done an amazing job with Jake. Really. But don't you think it might be time to consider other arrangements? He'd gestured vaguely, encompassing something I was supposed to understand. Jake's going to be 18 soon. College. He needs to start thinking about his future seriously. Maybe spending more time here, with us, would help him network. Meet the right people. The right people. As opposed to me. Apparently. I left that. Dinner early, claiming a headache. Jake had opted to stay, barely looking up from his phone when I said goodbye. The next morning, he texted, asking if I could transfer him money for new basketball shoes. The ones all the team were getting, $280. I transferred $300 and told him to get lunch too. That's how it was in the months leading up to graduation. Jake pulling away incrementally, spending more time in Westchester, coming home to Queens only when he needed something, his laundry, his favorite meal, money for this or that expense that Linda and Robert somehow hadn't covered. And always the comments about smell, about the apartment being too small, about everything being old, outdated, embarrassing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I kept depositing money into his college fund, even when my arthritis flared and the medication cost more than expected. Even when the building's boiler broke and we all had to chip in for emergency repairs. The account grew slowly but steadily, compound interest working its quiet magic while I worked my own, stretching every dollar until it begged for mercy. By March of his senior year, acceptance letters started arriving. Cornell, NYU, Boston University. Jake would bring them to me, like trophies, already planning dormitory decorations and spring break trips, never once asking how we'd pay for it all. Linda and Robert had mentioned something about loans, about Jake working summers, about everybody doing their part. They spoke in generalizations, assuming things would work out because things always worked out for people like them. I let them assume. Let Jake assume. The account sat there, growing quietly, waiting for the moment I'd imagined so many times. The moment when I'd sit Jake down, show him the statements, watch his face transform as he realized what I'd done. That he wouldn't need loans, wouldn't need to work 3 jobs like I had, could focus on his studies, on becoming whatever he dreamed of becoming. It would be my gift, my legacy, my way of showing him that love wasn't always about new cars and designer clothes. The graduation party was Linda's idea, a proper celebration, she'd said, at their country club. I'd offered to help with expenses, but she'd waved me off. This is what Robert and I do, Mom. Don't worry about it. So I didn't worry about it. I bought a new dress instead, the first one in 3 years. Navy blue with small white flowers, appropriate. For a grandmother. From the clearance rack, but still nicer than anything else in my closet. I had my hair done at the salon instead of the usual kitchen sink routine. Even splurged on a manicure, pale pink polish that the girl assured me was classic, timeless. I felt good walking into that country club. Proud. Jake looked handsome in his cap and gown, posing for pictures with classmates headed to Ivies and international universities. The room buzzed with that particular energy of potential, of young people on the cusp of everything. Parents networked over champagne while graduates clustered in groups, their laughter bright and careless. I was standing by the dessert table, admiring the tower of macarons that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget, when I heard Jake's voice cutting through the chatter. He was with a group of his basketball teammates, all of them tall and loose-limbed in their dress shirts and ties. One of them must have asked about family because I heard Jake laugh, that particular laugh I'd started recognizing. The one that meant he was about to say something he thought was clever. My grandmother's here somewhere. You'll know her when you see her. Or smell her, actually. She's got this thing about mothballs. Like, I'm pretty sure she bathes in them. The group laughed, and Jake continued, warming to his audience. Seriously, hugging her is like sticking your face in my great-aunt's closet. You know that old people. Smell? She's got it bad. I keep telling my mom we need to do something, but she says it's rude to mention it. As if letting her walk around like that isn't rude to everyone else. The macarons tower blurred. The champagne glass in my hand trembled, slightly, and I set it down carefully on the table. One of Jake's friends said something I couldn't catch, and Jake responded with another laugh. I love her and all, but thank God I'm going to be living in a dorm next year. No more Mothball Central. No more pretending her apartment doesn't smell. Like a funeral home. My mom's already planning to renovate once I'm out. About time, honestly. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Frozen. Processing. The words settling into my bones like shards of glass. Then, with the same careful precision I'd used to insert IVs for 35 years, I turned and walked out of the country club. Nobody noticed. Why would they? I was just the grandmother in the clearance rack dress, reeking apparently of mothballs and irrelevance. The drive home was a blur of taillights and tears I refused to let fall. My hands gripped the steering wheel of my 15-year-old Honda Civic, the one Jake always complained about when I picked him up from school, the one he started asking me not to drive to his basketball games because Tyler's mom had a Tesla and everyone would see. I drove past the exit for Queens, kept going until I found myself at the overlook near the Palisades where I used to take Jake when he was small. We'd count ships on the Hudson and make up stories about where they were going. I sat there until the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that Jake once said looked like cotton candy. My phone buzzed repeatedly. Linda first, wondering where I'd gone. Then Jake, a casual text asking if I could pick up his dry cleaning tomorrow. Nothing about the party. Nothing acknowledging I'd left. Maybe he didn't even know I'd heard him. When I finally got home, the apartment felt different. Smaller somehow. Shabbier. I looked at it through Jake's eyes and saw what he saw. The couch with its faded floral pattern that I'd bought secondhand when he was 7. The kitchen table with its scratched surface where we'd done 17 years of homework together. The photos covering the refrigerator, held up by magnets from every museum and zoo we'd visited when admission was free on certain days. I went to my bedroom closet and pulled out the shoebox from the top shelf. Inside were 17 years of bank statements, each one showing the slow, steady growth of Jake's college fund. I spread them across my bed like tarot cards, reading, "A future that had just evaporated. $123,437.62. The next morning came too soon. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee, the bitter taste matching my mood, when Jake burst through the door. He had his own key, of course. Had since he was old enough not to lose it. He was still wearing yesterday's clothes, rumpled now from sleeping in them at his mother's house. "Grandma," he said, grabbing an apple from the bowl on the counter, the same bowl I'd kept filled for 17 years. "Mom said you left early yesterday. You feeling okay?" I studied him over my coffee cup. This boy I'd raised. This young man who thought I smelled like mothballs and death. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. He shrugged, already scrolling through his phone. "Cool. Hey, so about that dry cleaning? And I need money for the senior trip. It's like $300. I know it's a lot, but everyone's going and Mom said to ask you since she just paid. For the graduation party, the senior trip. A week in Cancun that seemed to be less about celebration and more about Instagram photos." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "Jake," I said, "we need to talk." He glanced up, impatient. "Can it wait?" "I'm meeting Tyler in an hour. We're going to look at dorm stuff. His mom's taking us to that place in Soho that has the really cool bedding. You know, not like Target or whatever. Not like Target or whatever. Where I'd bought his sheets for 17 years. "No," I said. "It can't wait." Something in my tone must have penetrated because he actually put his phone down. Sat across from me at the scratch table where I'd taught him his multiplication tables and helped him write essays about what he wanted to be when he grew up. An astronaut at 6, a basketball player at 10, a doctor at 14. Now, at 18, he wanted to major in business because that's where the money was. "Jake," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I heard what you said yesterday. At the party. About me. About how I smell." His face had the grace to flush slightly. "Oh, that. Grandma, I didn't mean." I held up a hand, stopping him. "Yes, you did. You meant every word, and you've been saying similar things for months now. About the apartment, about my car, about my clothes, about me." He shifted uncomfortably, his fingers twitching toward his phone. "Look, I'm sorry, okay? It's just, you know how it is. Everyone at school, their families are different. And you're great, really. But sometimes it's hard when everyone else's. Grandparents are taking them to Europe and yours is what?" I prompted when he trailed off. You know? Just different. Different. Such a carefully chosen word. So much gentler than poor, than embarrassing, than old. I stood up, went to my bedroom, and came back with a manila folder, set it on the table between us. Jake eyed it suspiciously. "What's that?" "Open it," I said. He did, pulling out the latest bank statement. His forehead creased as he tried to make sense of the numbers. "What is this?" "Your college fund," I said simply. Or rather, what was going to be your college fund? His head snapped up. "What do you mean, was?" I sat back down, folding my hands in my lap. For 17 years, I've been saving. Every extra dollar, every overtime shift, every coupon clipped and sale shopped. I wore the same coat for over a decade, resolved my shoes until the cobbler said there was nothing left to work with. Ate pasta 5 nights a week when you weren't here because it was cheap and filling. Jake stared at the statement, the number finally registering. This is over $100,000. $123,437.62, I confirmed. Enough to pay for your undergraduate degree without loans. Enough so you could focus on studying instead of working. Enough so you could have the college experience you deserve. He looked up at me, and for a moment, I saw the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Grandma, I didn't know." "Of course you didn't. Because I never told you. I wanted it to be a surprise, a gift. My gift to you, separate from whatever your parents could provide. My way of showing you that love isn't always about new things and fancy clothes. Sometimes it's about sacrifice, about putting someone else's future before your own comfort." His fingers traced the numbers on the statement. "This is incredible. I can't believe you did this for me." "Did," I repeated, past tense. The confusion on his face would have been comical in other circumstances. "What do you mean?" I reached over and took the statement back, sliding it into the folder. "This money exists, but it's no longer yours." "What?" "Grandma, that doesn't make sense. You just said." "I said it was going to be your college fund. But that was before I realized something important. Before I heard you explain to your friends that hugging me was like sticking your face in a funeral home. Before I understood that all these years of love and sacrifice were nothing compared to the embarrassment of having a grandmother who smells like mothballs." His face went white. "Grandma, please. I was just talking. You know how it is with guys? We say stupid things. I didn't mean it." "Which time?" I asked. "When you told Tyler's mom you wished your real grandmother was more like her? When you asked me not to come to your basketball games because the other parents drove better cars? When you started staying at your mother's house every weekend because her guest room didn't smell like old people?" Each word hit him like a physical blow. He reached for the folder, but I pulled it back. "This money will still go to education," I continued, "but not yours. I'm going to donate it to a scholarship fund for students who understand the value of family, who appreciate sacrifice, who don't measure love by the label on someone's clothes or the car they drive." "You can't do that," he said, his voice cracking. "That's my money. You saved it for me." "No," I corrected. "I saved it for the grandson I thought I was raising. The one who understood that every dollar in that account represents something I went without. The one who would look at that number and see love, not a bank balance. That boy deserves this money. You? You're just someone who thinks I smell like mothballs." He was crying now, silent tears rolling down his cheeks. "Grandma, please. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll do better. I'll tell everyone I was wrong. I'll tell them what? That your grandmother doesn't actually smell? That you've suddenly realized her apartment is charming instead of embarrassing? That her car runs perfectly fine even if it's not a Tesla? No, Jake. You can't undo 17 years of slowly pulling away from me, of choosing your mother's world over mine. of being ashamed of where you came from. I stood up, taking the folder with me. Your mother and Robert will figure out your college finances. They're smart people with good jobs. I'm sure they'll manage. Maybe you can take out loans like most students. Maybe you'll work summers and weekends. Maybe you'll learn what it means to earn something instead of expecting it to be handed to you. Where are you going? He asked, panic in his voice. To the bank, I said, to set up that scholarship fund. I'm thinking I'll call it the Mothball Award, for students who understand that how someone smells matters far less than how they love. I left him there at my scratched kitchen table in my shabby apartment that apparently reeked of old age and disappointment. Left him with his Apple phone and designer clothes and his embarrassment about where he came from. The dry cleaning he'd asked about? He could figure that out himself. The bank manager was a young woman named Priya, who listened to my request with growing interest. A scholarship fund for first-generation college students, I explained. For kids who were raised by grandparents or other relatives. For students who understood that love sometimes smells like arthritis cream and sounds like a clanging radiator. She helped me set everything up. The Margaret Chen Memorial Scholarship, she suggested. But I shook my head. Just the Chen family scholarship, I said. No need for my name. The kids who receive this won't care who I am, only that someone believed in them. As we worked through the paperwork, she asked gently if I was sure. That's a significant amount of money, Mrs. Chen. Have you considered all your options? I thought about Jake, probably still sitting at my kitchen table, trying to figure out how to undo years of casual cruelty. I thought about Linda, who would call soon, indignant that I dared to discipline her son. I thought about Robert, who would probably offer to negotiate, to find some compromise that would keep everyone comfortable. And I thought about some kid out there, being raised by a grandmother or grandfather who worked 2 jobs and wore the same shoes until they fell apart. Some kid who would never dream of complaining about mothballs because they understood that love smells like sacrifice and sounds like someone working late to pay for your future. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I told Priya. She nodded and finished the paperwork. The fund would be managed by a local nonprofit that specialized in educational access. They'd select recipients based on financial need, academic potential, and an essay about family sacrifice. I made only one specific requirement. Priority would be given to students being raised by grandparents. When I got home, the apartment was empty. Jake had left a note on the table, his handwriting shaky. Grandma, please call me. We need to talk. I love you. He'd signed it with the little heart he used to draw on all my birthday cards until he turned 15 and decided that was too childish. I put the note in the trash. Linda called an hour later as expected. Her voice was shrill, accusatory. Mom, what did you do? Jake's hysterical. He says you're giving away his college money. That can't be true. It's true, I confirmed, calmly folding laundry as we talked. The same laundry I'd been doing for 17 years. The same routine that had apparently branded me as someone to be ashamed of. Have you lost your mind? She shrieked. That money is for Jake, for his education. You can't just give it away because of some stupid comment at a party. It wasn't just one comment, Linda, and you know it. You've watched him pull away from me for years. Made excuses for it. Boys will be boys. Teenagers are embarrassed by everything. He doesn't mean it. Well, he did mean it, and now he's facing the consequences. There was silence on the other end, then a deep breath. Mom, be reasonable. Jake made a mistake. He's 18. 18-year-olds say stupid things. You can't destroy his future over hurt feelings. I'm not destroying anything, I said, smoothing out one of my mothball-scented sweaters. Jake's future is intact. He has 2 parents with good jobs. He's smart, capable, and has every advantage. He'll be fine. He just won't have the cushion of my life savings to fall back on. Robert took the phone then, his voice switching into what I recognized as his negotiation tone. Maggie, let's discuss this rationally. What if Jake apologizes? Publicly, formally. What if he volunteers with elderly communities, learns to appreciate? To appreciate what? I interrupted. Old people? Is that what I am to him, Robert? A category to be tolerated? A community service project? That's not what I meant. I know exactly what you meant. You want Jake to perform contrition until I cave. Until I give him the money anyway, because that's what grandmothers do, right? We forgive. We forget. We hand over everything and pretend it doesn't hurt when we're relegated to obligatory holiday visits and birthday phone calls. Maggie. No, I said firmly. The decision is made. The fund is established. It's done. There was more, of course. Threats of legal action that we all knew would go nowhere. Attempts at emotional manipulation. Linda even drove over the next day, sitting in my living room, and crying about how I was punishing her for her mistakes, for leaving Jake with me all those years ago. Did I make you feel like a burden? I asked her. Did I ever once complain about raising Jake? Make you feel guilty for needing help? No, she admitted. Then why does your son think I'm something to be ashamed of? Where did he learn that kindness? Is weakness and sacrifice embarrassing? She didn't have an answer. The calls and visits continued for weeks. Jake showed up periodically, sometimes angry, sometimes contrite, always convinced that if he just found the right words, the right gesture, I'd relent. He brought flowers once, expensive ones from the shop his mother used. As if roses that cost more than my weekly grocery budget could erase years of casual disdain. You're really going to let strangers have my college money? He asked during one visit, his voice bitter. They're not strangers, I told him. They're kids like you, raised by grandparents who love them. The difference is they know the value of that love. He applied for financial aid, of course. Took out loans. Linda and Robert covered what they could, complaining all the while about interest rates and payment plans. Jake ended up at NYU anyway, though he'd have to work part-time to cover expenses. He moved into the dorms in August, and I heard from Linda that he was struggling to balance work and studies. Good, I thought. Let him learn what struggle actually looks like. The first Chen family scholarship was awarded in September to a girl named Maria, whose grandmother had raised her while cleaning offices at night. Maria's essay talked about how her grandmother's hands always smelled like industrial cleanser, how she'd fall asleep to the sound of her grandmother's sewing machine as she took in alterations for extra money, how love looked like homemade tamales for dinner every night because they were cheap to make in bulk, how sacrifice sounded like her grandmother saying no. Mija, you study, I'll handle the dishes. I presented Maria with the check at a small ceremony at her high school. She cried when she hugged me, and I breathed in the scent of her vanilla perfume. Probably from a discount store, probably the only bottle she owned. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for understanding. I understood perfectly. Jake didn't come home for Thanksgiving. Linda said he was too busy with work, that Black Friday retail shifts paid time and a half. He couldn't afford to miss them. I had dinner with my neighbor Mrs. Park instead, a Korean widow whose own grandchildren lived across the country. We made kimchi and watched game shows, and she never once mentioned mothballs. In December, a reporter from a local newspaper got wind of the scholarship fund, wanted to do a human interest piece about grandparents raising grandchildren, about sacrifice, and giving back. I declined the interview, but they talked to Maria instead. She told them about her grandmother, about the scholarship, about how it meant she could focus on her pre-med studies instead of working 3 jobs like her grandmother had. The article ran with a photo of Maria and her grandmother at the awards ceremony. In the background, slightly out of focus, you could see me. Just an elderly woman in a simple dress watching 2 people who understood that love doesn't come with conditions or designer labels. Jake saw the article. Linda made sure to forward it to me with a note. I hope you're happy. Jake read this and cried. Let him cry, I thought. Maybe tears would wash away some of the superficial gloss he'd accumulated. The scholarship fund grew after the article. Other grandparents reached out, wanting to contribute. Small amounts mostly, $10 here, $20 there. But it added up. By spring, we could award 3 scholarships instead of 1. I met all. The recipients. Heard their stories. Kids who did homework by candlelight when the electricity got cut off. Who wore the same pair of shoes until their toes poked through. Who never, ever complained that their grandparents' houses smelled like anything other than home. Jake graduated from his first year with a 3. 2 GPA. Respectable, considering he was working 20 hours a week at a clothing store. Linda sent me a photo of him in his retail uniform, folding expensive jeans for customers who probably never thought twice about the price tags. He looked tired. Good. He reached out occasionally, texts mostly. Careful, neutral messages about his grades, his job, the weather. Never about us. Never about what happened. Never about the future he'd had to reshape without my money cushioning his way. I responded just as carefully, just as neutrally. The grandmother who'd loved him unconditionally for 17 years was gone, replaced by someone more guarded. Someone who'd learned that love without boundaries was just an invitation to be hurt. Spring turned to summer, and the scholarship fund announced its second round of recipients. 4 kids this time, each with a story that would break your heart if you let it. Each with grandparents who'd given everything and asked for nothing in return. At the awards ceremony, held in the community center instead of a country club, I watched these teenagers hug their grandparents with genuine affection. No pulling away, no embarrassed looks, no jokes about mothballs or old people smell. Just love, pure and uncomplicated. One of the recipients, a boy named David who reminded me painfully of Jake at that age, gave a speech. He talked about his grandfather, who'd raised him after his parents died. How his grandfather worked as a janitor at the very college David would now attend. How he'd walk through those halls he'd cleaned for 30 years, not with a mop and bucket, but with textbooks and dreams. My grandfather's hands smell like floor wax, David said, his voice strong and clear. His clothes carry the scent of industrial bleach. His car is older than I am and makes a weird noise when you turn left. And I wouldn't change a single thing about him, because every smell, every sound, every sacrifice is what love looks like. Real love. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself or demand recognition. It just is. The audience applauded, and I saw more than one person wiping away tears. In that moment, I knew I'd made the right choice. Jake's college fund hadn't been wasted. It had just found its way to kids who understood its true value. Summer faded into fall, and I settled into a rhythm that felt both foreign and liberating. Without Jake's daily needs to structure my time, I discovered parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. I joined a book club at the library, started taking water aerobics at the community center, even signed up for a pottery class where my arthritis gnarled, fingers shaped clay into imperfect but satisfying bowls. The scholarship fund had taken on a life of its own. What started as my personal act of redirecting Jake's college money had grown into something larger. Local businesses began contributing. The story had touched people, especially grandparents, who saw their own sacrifices reflected in those students' essays. By October, we had enough funding to support 8 students through their first year of college. I was at the grocery store, carefully selecting apples for a pie I planned to bake for the book club, when I felt someone watching me. Jake stood at the end of the produce aisle, holding a basket with the kind of random items that suggested a college student's diet: instant ramen, energy drinks, a bag of chips. He looked different, thinner certainly, but something else too. The casual arrogance that used to sit on his shoulders like an expensive jacket had been replaced by something heavier. He approached slowly, as if I might bolt like a startled deer. Which was ridiculous. I'd faced down belligerent patients and demanding doctors for 35 years. I wasn't about to run from a 19-year-old boy, even if that boy had broken my heart. "Grandma," he said, his voice uncertain. "Hi." "Hello, Jake." I continued examining apples, selecting the firmest ones, the ones that would hold their shape during baking. "You look good," he offered. "The pottery class suits you." I glanced at him then, noting the purple shadows under his eyes. "Your mother, keeping you informed?" "She mentions things sometimes, says you're doing well, that you seem happy." "I am happy," I confirmed, placing the last apple in my bag. "It's amazing how light you feel when you stop carrying other people's disappointments." He flinched, his fingers tightening on the basket handle. "I deserved that. You deserve a lot of things, Jake. Unfortunately, what we deserve and what we get are often two different things. Something you're learning, I imagine." He followed me as I moved to the dairy section, hovering uncertainly as I selected yogurt. The Greek kind I'd never bought before because it was too expensive when I was saving every penny for his future. "I'm working 2 jobs now," he said suddenly. "The retail thing and tutoring high school kids in math. Remember how you helped me with calculus? All those nights at the kitchen table with the light that flickered? I remember. I also remember you, being embarrassed when your friends saw that flickering light through the window." His shoulders sagged. "I was an idiot." "Yes," I agreed. "You were." We stood there in the refrigerated section, the cold air raising goosebumps on my arms. Around us, other shoppers maneuvered their carts, living their own dramas, carrying their own regrets. "I read about Maria," he said finally. "The first scholarship recipient. She's doing amazing. Dean's List first semester. She sent a thank you note to the fund. Did you know that? Said she thinks about her grandmother every time she walks into class. How proud she must be." "Maria understands something you never did," I said, moving toward the checkout. "That being loved by someone who chooses to raise you when they don't have to is a gift beyond measure. Not a burden. Not an embarrassment. A gift." I paid for my groceries while Jake stood awkwardly to the side, his basket still clutched in his hands. As I collected my bags, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I miss you, Grandma. I miss Sunday dinners. I miss the way you hummed while cooking. I miss the smell of your kitchen, even though I said those terrible things." I stopped, turning to face him fully. The boy who'd mocked me for smelling like mothballs now stood in a grocery store, telling me he missed the very things he'd been ashamed of. Life had a funny way of teaching lessons. "I miss the boy who used to help me clip coupons," I said, who was proud to show his friends the cookies we baked together, who didn't care that my car was old or my clothes came from discount stores. But that boy disappeared somewhere around his 16th birthday, and I don't think he's coming back. "He could," Jake insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. "I could be better. I am better. This year has taught me. This year has taught you what it feels like to struggle. That's not the same as understanding why you were wrong. You're not sorry for hurting me, Jake. You're sorry for losing the money. There's a difference." "That's not true, isn't it? Tell me, if that bank account still had your name on it, would you be standing here right now? Or would you be at NYU, living in a nice dorm, taking your spring break trips, never thinking twice about the grandmother who smelled like mothballs?" His silence was answer enough. I left him standing there and drove home to my apartment that apparently smelled like a funeral home. Except now I didn't notice any smell except the lingering scent of the lavender dryer sheets I'd stupidly bought trying to fix something that wasn't broken. I'd thrown them out months ago, going back to my regular unscented ones. If my clothes smelled like anything now, it was just clean laundry and the faint hint of the pottery studio clay that never quite washed out from under my fingernails. Linda called that night, as I'd expected. "You saw Jake at the store. He told you?" He came. By after, he was upset. "Good," I said, not bothering to soften my response. Being upset is appropriate when you realize you've thrown away something precious for something worthless. Mom, please. It's been over a year. Can't you forgive him? He's learned his lesson. Has he? What lesson is that exactly? That actions have consequences? That you can't treat people like they're disposable and expect them to be there when you need them? Or just that life is harder without a $100,000 safety net? She sighed, and I could picture her in her perfect kitchen with its marble countertops and professional-grade appliances. The kitchen where Jake had spent his weekends, absorbing the values that told him I wasn't enough. "You're being cruel," she said finally. "No, Linda. I was being cruel when I let him treat me like an embarrassment for years without consequence. When I made excuses for his behavior. When I prioritized his comfort over my own dignity. What I'm being now is honest." The scholarship fund held its winter ceremony in December. 12 recipients this time, each with a story that reminded me why I'd made the right choice. One girl, Keisha, had been raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident. Her essay talked about how her grandmother sold her own car to pay for Keisha's SAT prep courses, taking 3 buses to work every day without complaint. Another recipient, Carlos, wrote about his grandfather teaching him to play chess on a board missing 3 pieces using buttons as substitutions. How those games, played at a wobbly table in a too-small apartment, taught him strategy and patience that no amount of money could buy. I sat in the audience, surrounded by other grandparents who understood, who'd made similar sacrifices, who'd been loved fiercely in return by grandchildren who saw their worth beyond material things. During the reception, I was approached by a woman I didn't recognize. She was about Linda's age, professionally dressed, but with tired eyes that suggested life hadn't always been smooth. "Mrs. Chen, I'm Patricia Williams. My nephew Thomas is one of this year's recipients." I shook her hand. He wrote beautifully about his grandmother. The part about her saving coins in a jar for his school supplies was particularly moving. She smiled, tears threatening. "That's my mother. She raised Thomas after my sister passed, gave up her retirement to work as a home health aide. When Thomas got into Columbia, she cried for 3 days. Happy tears, she said, but also scared ones. How would they afford it? And now she can. Stop working nights. Thomas can focus on his studies instead of wondering if he should drop out to help with bills. You've given them both their lives back." "I didn't give them anything they didn't earn," I said. The scholarship just recognized what was already there. Love, sacrifice, determination. "Still," she insisted. "Thank you. And I heard about your grandson. I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said, watching Thomas across the room, hugging his grandmother, while she beamed with pride. Some losses clear the way for better things. January brought snow and another unexpected encounter. I was at the pottery studio, working on a vase that refused to center properly on the wheel, when someone took the station next to mine. I glanced over and nearly knocked my clay off the wheel. Robert sat there, looking supremely out of place, in his designer suit, staring at the lump of clay the instructor had placed in front of him as if it might attack. "Since when do you do pottery?" I asked. Since my therapist suggested I needed a hobby that didn't involve spreadsheets or profit margins, he admitted. "Linda doesn't know I'm here." "At a pottery studio?" "At this pottery studio." He attempted to center his clay, failing spectacularly. "I wanted to talk to you. Figured you couldn't storm off if your hands were covered in clay." I considered walking. Away anyway. Dignity be damned, but curiosity won. "What could you possibly have to say that hasn't already been said?" He was quiet for a moment, focused on the clay that was now lopsided beyond salvage. "I wanted to apologize. Not for Linda or Jake. They need to do that themselves. But for my part in it." "Which part? The part where you suggested Jake needed to upgrade from my influence? Or the part where you acted like I was a temporary solution to a permanent problem?" Both, he said simply. All of it. I grew up with nothing. Did you know that? Food stamps and hand-me-downs. I worked so hard to get away from that, to be successful, to give my family everything I didn't have. Somewhere along the way, I confused everything with everything that costs money. I kept my eyes on my vase, which was finally starting to take shape. And I taught Jake, by example if not by words, that where you come from is something to be ashamed of. That success means leaving people behind. That love can be measured in price tags. He gave up on the clay entirely, turning to face me. You saved every penny for 17 years, wore the same coat until it fell apart, ate pasta 5 nights a week, and I had the audacity to suggest you weren't enough. You did. That scholarship fund? It's brilliant. Those kids, they get it. They understand what Jake and I forgot, that sacrifice is the highest form of love, that grandparents who choose to raise grandchildren are heroes, not burdens. Pretty words, Robert, but what do you want? Forgiveness? Permission to feel better about your role in this? No, he said, surprising me. I want to contribute to the fund, anonymously, a significant amount. Consider it. Penance. The fund doesn't need your penance, but I need to give it. Please. I finished shaping my vase, considering. Finally, I nodded. Fine. But no strings, no expectations, and definitely no using it as a way to buy back into Jake's good graces. Understood. He stood, wiping his clay-covered hands on the provided towel. For what it's worth, Maggie, Jake knows he lost something irreplaceable. He just doesn't know how to live with that knowledge yet. Then maybe one day he'll understand how all those scholarship recipients feel, I said, grateful for what they have instead of ashamed of what they don't. Robert left, and I finished my vase. It wasn't perfect, slightly off-center with a small dent near the base where my thumb had pressed too hard. But it was mine, created by hands that had held a baby who grew into a boy who grew into a stranger. Those same hands now shaped clay into something new, something that didn't require anyone else's approval to have value. Spring arrived with its usual mixture of rain and hope. The scholarship fund announced its newest recipients at a ceremony that had outgrown the community center and moved to a local high school auditorium. 25 students this year, thanks to Robert's contribution and the growing support from the community. I was backstage, preparing to present the awards, when Jake appeared. He looked better than he had at the grocery store. Still tired, but the hollow desperation had been replaced by something else. Determination, maybe. Or acceptance. They told me I couldn't come to the ceremony, he said, that it wouldn't be appropriate. But I had to try. Why are you here, Jake? To see what I gave up, he said simply. To watch you give to strangers what I threw away. To understand, maybe for the first time, what I actually lost. I studied him. This young man who carried my daughter's eyes and his father's height and neither of their hearts. You lost a grandmother who loved you unconditionally, who would have given you anything, who did give you everything, only to be told it smelled like mothballs and looked like poverty. I know. Do you? Because knowing and understanding are two different things. You know I redirected your college fund. Do you understand why? Because I hurt you. I shook my head. Because you showed me that my love was being wasted on someone who couldn't value it. These kids out there, they understand what you never did. That being loved by someone who chooses you every day is worth more than any bank account. The stage manager signaled it was time. I turned to go, but Jake spoke again. I work with kids now, tutoring. Some of them are being raised by grandparents. I see how they light up when talking about them. How proud they are. How I used to be, before I lost my way. And that means what? Exactly? It means I know what I threw away. Not the money. The money was just evidence. Proof that you loved me enough to sacrifice. What I threw away was the sacrifice itself, the love behind it. the grandmother who gave me everything and asked for nothing except not to be ashamed of her. I looked at him one last time before heading to the stage. Then live with that knowledge, Jake. Let it shape you into someone better, someone who deserves the next person who loves you that much. The ceremony was beautiful. Each recipient spoke about their grandparents, and the stories wove together into a tapestry of love and sacrifice that had the audience reaching for tissues. Maria, now a sophomore, gave the keynote speech about how the scholarship had changed not just her life, but her grandmother's too. "My grandmother no longer works nights," she said. "She sleeps in a bed instead of napping on the bus between jobs. She goes to church without dozing off during the sermon. She has time to tend her small garden, to visit with friends, to be something other than tired. This scholarship didn't just pay for my education. It gave my grandmother her life back." As I presented the awards, shaking hands with kids who glowed with possibility, I thought about Jake sitting somewhere in that auditorium, watching what his mockery had helped create. The Chen Family Scholarship Fund had become something larger than either of us, a testament to grandparents everywhere who loved without condition and sacrificed without complaint. After the ceremony, I found myself surrounded by recipients and their families, grandmothers with worn hands and bright eyes, grandfathers who stood a little straighter knowing their grandchildren were proud of them, kids who understood that love sometimes looks like darned socks and generic cereal, like apartments that are too small and cars that are too old, like hands that smell of hard work and hearts that never quit. Mrs. Chen, one of the new recipients, approached me. Her name was Anna, and she'd written about her grandfather teaching her to cook on a stove with only 2 working burners, how they'd created gourmet meals with food bank ingredients and imagination. "Thank you," she said simply, "for understanding, for seeing us." "Thank you," I replied, "for reminding me what matters." Later, as I was leaving, I passed Jake in the parking lot. He was sitting in his car, not his mother's BMW or his father's Lexus, but a beat-up Honda that looked older than mine. He was staring at something in his hands, and as I passed, I saw it was a photo. I knew without looking closer that it was one of us, from before the shame, before the pulling away, before mothballs became more important than memories. I didn't stop. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said by 25 kids on that stage. Kids who knew the value of what Jake had thrown away. Summer came again, marking 2 years since that graduation party where everything changed. I was in my kitchen, making jam from berries I'd bought at the farmer's market, when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Jake. Mom gave me your new number. I'm not asking for anything, not forgiveness or money or even a response. I just wanted you to know that I've been volunteering at a senior center, teaching computer skills. There's a woman there, Mrs. Rodriguez, who reminds me of you. She wears the same lavender perfume her late husband bought her 40 years ago. The other volunteers complain about the scent. I told them anyone who thinks love smells bad doesn't deserve to smell it at all. I'm trying to be someone who deserves it, even if I never smell it again from you. I understand if you delete this. I just needed you to know." I read the message 3 times, then deleted it. But something in my chest, something that had been frozen solid for 2 years, cracked just a little. Not enough to thaw, not enough to forgive, but enough to hope that somewhere out there, Jake was becoming the man I'd once believed he could be. The scholarship fund continued to grow. By year 3, we were supporting 50 students annually. I still presented the awards, still cried at their essays, still marveled at grandparents who gave everything and asked for nothing in return. Robert continued his anonymous donations. Linda sent occasional updates about Jake through carefully neutral emails. And Jake himself stayed away, respecting the boundary I'd built with $100,000 bricks. I filled my days with pottery and books and water aerobics, with friends who didn't care what I smelled like or what car I drove, with scholarship recipients who sent updates about their grades and their dreams, and their grandparents who finally had time to rest. One day, while sorting through old photos for a scrapbooking project, I found the picture Jake must have been looking at in his car that night. It was from his 10th birthday. We were in my kitchen, the one with the flickering light and scratched table. He was laughing at something. Chocolate cake smeared on his face, his arms wrapped around me like I was the most precious thing in the world. I was laughing too, my hand on his head, my eyes full of the kind of love that doesn't calculate costs or expect returns. I looked at that photo for a long time, remembering the boy who'd helped me make that cake, insisting on cracking the eggs, himself even though shell pieces ended up in the batter. The boy who'd declared it the best cake ever, not because it was perfect, but because we'd made it together. That boy was gone. The young man who'd replaced him was learning hard lessons about love and loss and the weight of regret. Maybe someday he'd have children of his own. Maybe they'd be raised by grandparents too, through circumstance or choice. Maybe he'd remember the smell of mothballs and realize it was actually the scent of sacrifice, of love that gives without, counting, of hands that work until they ache to provide for someone else's future. Or maybe not. Maybe he'd live his whole life carrying the weight of throwing away something precious for the approval of people who didn't matter. Either way, it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. I put the photo back in the box and went to prepare for the next scholarship ceremony. Somewhere out there, another grandmother was saving coins in a jar. Another grandfather was working an extra shift. Another child was being loved in a way that money could never measure. They deserved to be celebrated. They deserved to be seen. They deserved to know that their love, regardless of what it smelled like or looked like or sounded like, was worth everything. The Chen Family Scholarship Fund had become my legacy, born from pain, but growing into something beautiful. Every recipient was proof that Jake had been wrong, that I had been right to redirect his college fund to those who understood its true value. They were my vindication, my revenge, and my redemption all at once. As for Jake, he was learning what countless others had learned before him, that some mistakes can't be undone, some words can't be unsaid, and some love, once rejected, doesn't offer second chances. Perhaps that knowledge would make him better. Perhaps it would simply make him bitter. That was his choice to make, his burden to carry. I had jam to finish, essays to read, and scholarships to award. I had a life to live that no longer revolved around someone who thought I smelled like mothballs and shame. The money I'd saved for 17 years was finally doing what I'd always intended, changing lives through education. Just not the life I'd originally planned, and in the end, that turned out to be the greatest gift of all. Not for Jake, who would spend years working to pay for the education I'd once freely offered. But for Maria and David and Anna and Thomas and dozens of others who understood that love smells like sacrifice, sounds like encouragement, and looks like grandparents who give everything and ask only for respect in return. They got their education. Their grandparents got their recognition. And I got something I hadn't even known I needed. The knowledge that my love had value even if Jake couldn't see it. That my sacrifices mattered even if they smelled like mothballs. That I was worth more than the embarrassment of a foolish boy who learned too late that some things, once lost, can never be recovered. The jar of jam sealed with a satisfying pop, and I smiled. Tomorrow there would be new applications to read, new essays about grandparents who worked miracles with minimum wage and maximum love, new stories of sacrifice and devotion that would make my heart swell and my eyes water, new recipients to celebrate, new futures to enable, new lives to change. And not one of them would ever make me feel like I smelled like anything other than love. 5 years. That's how long it had been since I'd heard my grandson say I smelled like mothballs in front of 200 people at his graduation party. 5 years since I'd redirected his college fund to help other grandparent-raised children who understood the value of sacrifice. 5 years of pottery classes and book clubs and scholarship ceremonies that filled my heart in ways I'd never expected. I was 81 now, my fingers a bit more crooked with arthritis, my steps a bit slower on the community center stairs. But my mind was sharp as ever, and my purpose had never been clearer. The Chen Family Scholarship Fund had become something beyond my wildest dreams, supporting over 300 students across the state. We'd expanded beyond individual scholarships to include mentorship programs, support groups for custodial, grandparents, and even emergency funds for families in crisis. It was a Tuesday morning in October when everything shifted again. I was reviewing scholarship applications at my kitchen table, the same scratched surface where I'd once helped Jake with homework, when my doorbell rang. Tuesday mornings were unusual for visitors. My neighbors knew I spent them reading applications, preparing for the committee meeting that afternoon. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with someone I didn't immediately recognize. A young woman, professionally dressed but with an exhausted air about her, holding the hand of a small boy who couldn't have been more than 4. Behind her tired eyes, though, something familiar flickered. "Mrs. Chen?" she said hesitantly. "I'm Emma Martinez. You probably don't remember me, but I was one of your first scholarship recipients 7 years ago." Emma. Of course I remembered Emma. She'd written about her grandmother who worked 3 jobs after her parents died in an accident, who made her Halloween costumes from thrift store finds and imagination, who taught her that rich was a state of mind, not a bank balance. Emma, who'd graduated summa cum laude with a degree in social work. "Of course I remember you," I said, opening the door wider. "You sent updates every semester. Social work at Columbia. Your grandmother was so proud at your graduation. I was there, remember?" Her eyes filled with tears. "You came. Even though there were 50 other recipients that year, you came to my graduation. I came to all of them when I could," I said, noticing how the little boy pressed against his mother's leg, eyeing me warily. "And who's this?" "This is my son, Mateo." She squeezed his hand gently. "Mateo, this is Mrs. Chen. She's the lady Mommy told you about, the one who helped Mommy go to school." The boy looked up at me with large brown eyes that held too much wariness for someone so young. "Hi," he whispered. "Hello, Mateo." I smiled. "Would you like to come in? I was just about to make some cookies." "Do you like cookies?" He glanced at his mother for permission before nodding solemnly. Emma's shoulders seemed to sag with relief, and I ushered them inside, noting the single bag she carried, the way her professional clothes were clean but worn at the edges, the careful way she helped Mateo with his jacket as if it was the only one he had. While I got Mateo settled at the table with some paper and crayons I kept for visiting children of other scholarship recipients, Emma stood by the window, her arms wrapped around herself. "I'm sorry to just show up like this," she began. "I know you're busy. It's just, I didn't know where else to go." "Tell me," I said simply, putting the kettle on for tea. And she did. The story came out in pieces between sips of tea and Mateo's quiet coloring. Emma had graduated and found work at a family services agency, helping other children who'd lost parents. She'd married a fellow social worker, had Mateo, thought she was building the stable life her grandmother had always dreamed of for her. Then her husband had died in a car accident 6 months ago, leaving her with medical bills, funeral expenses, and a grief-stricken 4-year-old who barely spoke anymore. "I've been trying to hold it together," she said, her voice barely above, a whisper. "Working full-time, taking care of Mateo, dealing with the bills. My grandmother wants to help, but she's 78 now and has her own health problems. I can't burden her again. She already raised me. She shouldn't have to help raise her great-grandson, too." I watched Mateo carefully coloring within the lines, his small face serious with concentration. He'd chosen all blue crayons, creating a monochrome world on the white paper. "I'm about to lose our apartment," Emma continued. I've applied for assistance, but everything takes time, and my landlord won't wait. I have a job interview tomorrow for a position that pays more, but I don't have anyone to watch Mateo. His daycare discharged us when I couldn't pay last month. I remembered you saying at one of the ceremonies that the fund was about more than just college, that it was about supporting families. I don't know if that means situations like mine, but I didn't know who else to ask. She was crying. Now, silent tears that she quickly wiped away, glancing at Mateo to make sure he hadn't noticed. He had, of course. Children always notice. He set down his crayon and climbed into his mother's lap, patting her face with small hands that reminded me of another child long ago, who used to comfort me the same way when I was sad. I opened my laptop and pulled up the emergency fund guidelines we'd established 2 years prior. Situations exactly like yours, I said. Temporary crisis support for families in our network. You're not just a former recipient, Emma. You're family, and families help each other. Within an hour, I'd arranged for emergency funding to cover 3 months of rent and daycare, connected Emma with our network's grief counseling resources, and scheduled Mateo to spend tomorrow with Mrs. Park next door, who ran an informal daycare and had a gift with quiet children. This isn't charity, I told Emma as she tried to thank me through fresh tears. This is investment. In you, in Mateo, in the future you're building. Your grandmother invested in you. We invested in you, and now we're protecting that investment. As they prepared to leave, Mateo tugged on my sleeve. He held up the blue picture he'd been working on. It was a house with a garden, all in shades of blue. "This is for you," he said, the longest sentence I'd heard from him. "It's beautiful," I said, accepting it gravely. "What's this here?" I pointed to a small figure by the house. "That's the grandma," he said. "She's taking care of the flowers." I looked at Emma, who was watching her son with a mixture of love and pain. "Does the grandma in your picture have a name?" I asked Mateo. He shook his head. "Just grandma. Like mommy's grandma. And you." They left with Emma clutching the emergency fund paperwork and my phone number, with a bag of cookies for Mateo and a promise to return next week. I put Mateo's blue picture on my refrigerator, next to the photos of scholarship recipients at their graduations, their weddings, their celebrations. That evening, I was still thinking about Emma and Mateo when Linda called. These days, our conversations were cordial, but distant, limited to holidays and health updates. So her calling on a random Tuesday evening was unusual. "Mom," she started. "Without preamble, Jake's here. He wants to talk to you." "He's had 5 years to talk to me," I replied, not unkindly but firmly. "I know. But something's happened. Please, just listen." Before I could respond, I heard fumbling with the phone and then a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. Deeper now, more mature, but still unmistakably Jake. "Grandma?" "I'm here," I said, neither welcoming nor dismissive. "I know I have no right to call, no right to anything from you. But I needed you to know. I'm getting married." I waited, saying, "Nothing. Her name is Sylvia. She's a nurse like you were. Works in pediatric oncology. She's nothing like the person I was when I knew you. Nothing like the person I thought I wanted to be." Still, I remained silent. "She grew up being raised by her grandmother too," he continued, his voice thick with emotion. "In a 1-bedroom apartment in the Bronx. Her grandmother cleaned hotels at night and watched Sylvia during the day. Never missed a school play, never. Complained about being tired. Sylvia talks about her the way I should have talked about you." The refrigerator hummed in the silence that followed. "We're having a small ceremony," Jake went on. "Just family and close friends. Sylvia's grandmother is giving her away. She's 92 and still insists on making all the food for the reception herself. Sylvia tried to hire caterers, but her grandmother said store-bought food has no love in it. That celebrations need to be seasoned with care." He paused and I could hear him breathing, gathering courage. I told Sylvia about you, about what I did, what I said, what I lost. She said she couldn't marry someone who could be so cruel to the person who raised him. She was right. So I've spent the last year trying to become someone who deserves her, who might someday deserve forgiveness. What do you want from me, Jake? I asked finally. Nothing, he said quickly. I'm not calling to invite you to the wedding. I know that bridge is burned. I'm not calling to ask for forgiveness or money or anything else. I wanted you to know that I learned. Finally. Too late, but I learned. Every month, I donate to your scholarship fund. I volunteer at the senior center teaching computer skills. I'm in therapy, working through why I became someone who could be ashamed of love. The boy I raised would never have needed therapy to understand that, I said quietly. No, he agreed. The boy you raised knew better. I'm trying to find him again. I thought about Emma and Mateo, about blue houses and grandmothers tending gardens, about cycles of love and loss and the possibility of redemption. Tell me about Sylvia, I said. He did. For 20 minutes, he talked about a woman who sounded like everything I would have hoped for him. Strong, compassionate, grounded in values that money couldn't buy. A woman who understood that love smelled like whatever sacrifice happened to. Smell like bleach from hotel cleaning supplies in her grandmother's case. She wants to meet you, he said eventually. Not now. Not before we've earned it. But someday she wants to thank the woman who raised me. Even if I failed you, she says, you must have done something right for me to be able to recognize what real love looks like when I finally saw it. I closed my eyes, feeling every one of my 81 years. And what do you want? I want to introduce my children to their great-grandmother someday. I want them to know where I really came from. Not the Westchester house or the country club life, but the Queen's apartment with the clanging radiator and the kitchen table where you taught me everything I forgot and am trying to remember. I want them to know that their great-grandmother saved every penny for 17 years because she loved me more than I deserved. I want them to understand what I didn't, that being loved like that is the greatest gift anyone can receive. That's a lot of wants, I observed. I know. And I know I might never get any of them. But Sylvia says the first step to becoming better is acknowledging how far you've fallen. So I'm acknowledging it. All of it. I looked at Mateo's blue house on my refrigerator, at the small figure tending the garden with such care. Life was strange and circular and sometimes cruel, but sometimes it offered second chances in the most unexpected ways. Send me a wedding photo, I said finally. I'd like to see the woman who's helping you remember who you used to be. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then Jake spoke, his voice cracking like the teenager he'd once been. Thank you, Grandma. Thank you. I hung up without saying goodbye, not ready for more than I'd already given. But that night, for the first time in 5 years, I pulled out the old photo albums and looked at pictures of Jake growing up. Not with regret or anger, but with something closer to curiosity. Who was this man he was becoming? Could people really change that fundamentally? 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photo, Jake in a simple suit standing next to a woman in an elegant but understated dress. She was beautiful in the way that came from kindness rather than cosmetics, her arm linked through his, her smile genuine and warm. In the background, slightly out of focus but unmistakably proud, stood an elderly woman in a purple dress, her gray hair pinned up with what looked like drugstore bobby pins, her face glowing as she watched the couple. On the back of the photo, in Jake's handwriting, her grandmother made Sylvia's dress by hand. It took her 6 months of sewing in the evenings after work. Sylvia says it's the most beautiful dress in the world because every stitch was placed with love. I'm learning to see the stitches now, all of them, even the ones I pulled out. I put the photo in my jewelry box, not ready to display it but unable to throw it away. Maybe someday I'd be ready to put it on the refrigerator next to Mateo's blue house. Maybe not. Time would tell. The Scholarship Fund's 10th anniversary gala was held that December at a hotel ballroom donated by a local business owner whose daughter had been a recipient. I sat at the head table, watching hundreds of people celebrate what had grown from one grandmother's redirected college fund into a movement that had changed thousands of lives. Maria, our very first recipient, now Dr. Maria Gonzalez, gave the keynote speech. She talked about her grandmother, who had passed the year before, and how the scholarship had given them both dignity in those final years together. She announced that she was establishing her own fund within hours, specifically for pre-med students being raised by grandparents. As the evening progressed, recipient after recipient approached me with updates, photographs, stories of success, and struggle and persistence. A young man named David, now teaching at the same college where his janitor grandfather had mopped floors. Anna, who'd opened a restaurant featuring the recipes she'd learned on her grandfather's two-burner stove. Carlos, who'd become a software engineer and created an app connecting custodial grandparents with resources and support. Near the end of the evening, Emma appeared at my table with Mateo, who was wearing a little suit and looked very serious about it. They'd been doing better. The emergency fund had bridged the gap until Emma secured her new position, and Mateo was thriving in grief counseling and at Mrs. Park's daycare. "We have something for you," Emma said, nudging Mateo forward. He handed me a rolled-up paper, then climbed uninvited into my lap, which seemed to surprise his mother but felt perfectly natural to me. I unrolled it to find another drawing, but this one was different. Still a house with a garden, but now in full color. The grandmother figure was wearing a purple dress and smiling, and she wasn't alone. The garden was full of children of all ages, all helping tend the flowers. "That's you," Mateo explained, pointing to the grandmother. "And those are all the kids you helped. Mommy told me stories. The flowers are all the dreams growing." I hugged him tight. This little boy who understood at 4 what my grandson hadn't understood at 18. That love was about tending gardens together, about making beauty from whatever soil you were given, about seeing the value in every bloom regardless of the pot it grew in. As the evening wound down, I found myself thinking about circles and cycles, about how pain could transform into purpose, about how one bitter moment at a graduation party had led to this room full of light and possibility. The money I'd saved for Jake had educated hundreds, had prevented families from falling apart, had created a network of support that strengthened with each passing year. I thought about Jake, trying to rebuild himself into someone worthy of a woman who understood the value of handmade wedding dresses and grandmothers who seasoned food with love. I thought about Emma and Mateo, proving that success wasn't a straight line, but a winding path that sometimes doubled back on itself. I thought about all the grandparents who'd sat in this room over the years, finally being seen and celebrated for their sacrifices. Robert approached me as the event ended, his own hair now silver, his face showing the wear of years and perhaps conscience. He'd been one of our largest anonymous donors for 5 years, though we both pretended I didn't. "No, it was him. It's remarkable," he said, gesturing at the crowds of families still lingering, reluctant to let the evening end. "What you built from disappointment." "I didn't build it," I corrected. "They did. Every grandmother who worked extra shifts, every grandfather who made magic from minimum wage, every child who understood that love doesn't have a price tag. I just gave them a platform." He nodded, then hesitated. "Jake sent me a photo from his wedding. I know. He seems different, changed." "Time will tell," I said, watching Mateo run between tables with other recipients' children, their laughter bright as bells. "Do you think, will you ever?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Forgiveness isn't a straight line either. But I'm no longer angry." The anger transformed into this. I gestured at the room. "Into something useful." That's enough for now. As I prepared to leave, Mateo ran back to me, throwing his small arms around my legs. "When can I come help with the cookies again?" he asked. "Whenever you want," I promised. "My door is always open to you. Because we're family," he said matter-of-factly. "All of us. The scholarship family." Emma apologized for his forwardness, but I waved her off. He was right. We were a family, connected not by blood, but by understanding. By knowing what it meant to be raised by grandparents who gave everything. By recognizing that sacrifice came in many forms, and all of them smelled like love. The drive home was quiet, the streets wet with December rain that made everything shine. I thought about the first drive home 5 years ago, how bitter and broken I'd felt. How could I have known then that Jake's cruel words would catalyze something this beautiful? That the money I'd saved for one ungrateful child would instead nurture hundreds of grateful ones? In my apartment, the same one Jake had been so ashamed of, I put Mateo's new drawing on the refrigerator next to his blue house. The kitchen still had the same scratched table, the same flickering light I'd never bothered to fix. But now these things felt like badges of honor rather than symbols of poverty. This was where love had lived for 17 years. Where homework was completed and dreams were nurtured and a boy was raised who should have known better. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, but something made me look. This is Sylvia, Jake's wife. He doesn't. "No, I'm texting you. I wanted to say thank you. Not for him, but for the 347 students your fund has helped so far. I was number 212. You probably don't remember. There are so many of us, but you changed my life. Both our lives, in different ways. My grandmother sends her regards. She says any woman who can transform pain into purpose is a queen in her book. I hope someday I can thank you in person." I stared at the message for a long time. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of humor sharper than any writer could devise. The woman helping Jake find his way back to humanity was herself a product of the fund his cruelty had created. If I'd given him that college money, he would never have met her. She wouldn't have been at Columbia. Their paths would never have crossed. I didn't respond to the text, not yet, maybe not ever, but I saved it, adding it to the collection of things I wasn't ready to face but couldn't quite release. At 81, I'd learned that life was neither linear nor fair. It was messy and painful, and sometimes cruel. But it was also capable of alchemy, of transforming the basest materials into gold. Jake's mockery had become hundreds of scholarships. My hurt had become a haven for struggling families. The money I'd saved in sorrow was now dispersed in joy. Tomorrow, there would be new applications to read, new stories of grandparents who smelled like whatever their job required. Industrial cleaner, cooking oil, earth from gardening, yes, even mothballs from clothes stored carefully to last another season. New essays from children who understood that these scents were perfume, that weathered hands were beautiful, that love lived in small apartments and old cars and scratched kitchen tables where dreams were built one homework assignment at a time. And maybe, someday, there would be a knock at my door. A young man with familiar eyes holding a small child saying, "This is your great-grandmother. She's the one who taught me that love is a garden that requires constant tending. She's the reason. We have flowers. Or maybe not. Maybe Jake would remain a lesson rather than a presence, a catalyst rather than a continuation. Either way, I'd done what I set out to do all those years ago. I'd invested in the future. Just not the future I'd originally planned. The Chen Family Scholarship Fund would continue long after I was gone. The recipients would become donors. The helped would become helpers. And somewhere in that endless cycle, the ghost of a boy who thought his grandmother smelled like mothballs would finally be laid to rest, replaced by hundreds of children who knew better. I made myself tea in my old kitchen, inhaling the familiar scents of home. Lemon dish soap, the faint smell of tonight's dinner. The indefinable scent that comes from years of living and loving in the same space. If this smelled like mothballs, to some, so be it. To others, to the ones who mattered, it smelled like safety, like sacrifice, like home. And that was more than enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't. Want to pass these up? Just click and check them out.